Oh shit! Get those scripts down quickly. Enemy helicopter incoming. Troop 2 harpoon, shot and bearing 127. Get us down. Dive now. Dive, dive, dive.
Make depth 150 feet, dive by.
We'd only been at war for 3 days, and already I'd been forced to take my boat to Hollylock, the US naval facility. Within hours of hostility starting, the United Kingdom command a cruise missile attack. Most targets had been symbolic. The Tower of London had been hit. Its ancient but sturdy walls had withstood the impact well with only light damage. But a large part of Buckingham Palace was now a burnt-out, blackened shell. Fortunately, Her Majesty had been away, but several of her staff had been killed. Analysts claim that the next set of targets would no doubt be strategic, and so our base at Faz Lane was a major target. We moved to Hollylock, where the US Navy claim they have sufficient defences in place to counter any threat. As the land war began to reach a crescendo, I received my orders to take my boat out on patrol. We'd received intelligence that a Soviet Amphibious task force was heading for Oslo, Norway. They were going to invade Scandinavia, and we had to stop them. I was captain of HMS Courageous, a Churchill Class nuclear-powered submarine. She was from a older class of boat, especially with the new Swiftsures and now the even newer yet Trafalgar class coming into service. But in the right hands, she remained a potent, deadly bladed weapon for the Royal Navy and our country's arsenal. At Hollylock, we armed our boat with harpoon anti-shipping missiles, as well as targetfish torpedoes and Moss decoys. We set sail, making our way northeast to begin patrolling off the Norwegian coast, block the path of the invasion flotilla. Working so close inshore, in the shallows, worked both with us and against us. For a submarine, you could hide amongst the noise, the shallows, the sound of the surf, but on the flip side, you had little room to manoeuvre. If the enemy detected you, and torpedoes were launched or depth charges came raining down among you, there was only so many places you could go. It also hampered our senses too. We got a fix on several ships. Not a brilliant fix, but we knew that the flotilla was there, the landing force was there, and there were several escorts among the force. But finding out exactly what they were, and exactly where they were, was quite a difficult task. Right then, number one, what do we have?
Well, Captain, so far we're only detecting part of the enemy force, but there appears to be at least 2, perhaps as many as 4 enemy escorts out there. The rest of the enemy flotilla appears to be unarmed transport ships, most probably carrying the enemy force's heavy equipment.
To our southeast, we had confirmation of a large anti-submarine warfare ship, perhaps a Courageous class cruiser. NATO classes them as cruisers, more due to their ability to launch the anti-shipping missile systems at surface ships as well as submarines. We had also picked up active pinging to our northeast. We didn't have a detection on a vessel there, but there was something there, and it was no doubt an escort to this flotilla. It was in this direction that we fired our first 2 torpedoes, hoping to bring our weapons around in a roundabout way, confusing the enemy as to where our true location was. I allowed one of our torpedoes to go active, and it began pinging using its own inbuilt sonar. No doubt the enemy escorts would pick up on this, and we began to receive active pinging from 3 directions. With our second torpedo, we turned it south towards the Courageous class cruiser, coming in from the north, where I hoped the enemy Courageous class captain would believe that our submarine lay. We also detected an enemy torpedo that had been fired in our general direction, but not knowing exactly where we were, this torpedo went into a circular search mode, as did another to the northeast. Whilst our torpedo to the north was confusing the enemy, forcing them to launch torpedoes sporadically in the area, our other torpedo began to home in on the Courageous class ship to the south, who had now detected our passive torpedo. They began to release noisemakers and began to turn and move like a scalded cat. Unfortunately for them, their noisemakers were not going to save them. Our torpedo was still on the wire, still being controlled by my weapons officer. He was putting in corrections for the torpedo through the wire every few seconds.
Captain, torpedo detected northeast. on a converging surge pattern with our boat.
Yes, thank you, number 1. Helm, come right to 260. Our tactics appeared to be working. The Kara had released a torpedo also, in a general direction from which our own torpedo had closed with them. That torpedo began to active ping, but we were well out of the way when it passed us. The Kara had continued to release noisemakers and manoeuvre, not realising that it was hopeless gestures trying to outwit our torpedo that was being controlled remotely. And as it closed the distance, my weapons officer allowed it to go active, and it homed in immediately upon the Kara. The damage was terminal, and she immediately began to go down at the stern, releasing oil all over the sea. With the most powerful of the enemy escorts in a sinking condition, we went quiet. This wasn't just to avoid the remaining enemy escorts with their active sonar pinging away, trying to sniff us out. This was also to ensure that we stayed undetected by the enemy torpedoes that had already been launched in our general direction. Charging in from the east in our general direction was a Soviet designation Project 1135 Burevestnik, or Petrel, as it is in English. NATO code name for this vessel is Krivak, and so we now knew we definitely had at least one Krivak class frigate heading in our direction, potentially 2. My weapons officer had spent the last few minutes putting together a torpedo firing mission, as it were, using torpedo tubes 1 through to 5. With this we hoped to break up their formation, and hopefully send the other escorts to the bottom to join the Kara that we'd already sunk. We shot 3 torpedoes in a northeasterly direction, and 2 in a southerly direction. On this bearing we let them run for a bit before my specialist turned them eastwards towards where the enemy fleet still remained. It wasn't long before the enemy Krivak class that was coming from the east detected one of our torpedoes and began to release noisemakers and manoeuvring frantically to escape our torpedoes that was coming towards them in a vice-like fashion. Once again my weapons specialist kept the torpedoes on the wire and kept them passive for now, and every few seconds feeding corrections to the torpedoes through the wire that was being unravelled from our boat, until my weapons officer deemed it necessary to allow tube number 2 torpedo to go active, and it immediately began to homing on the Krivak, which at that present time was actually heading in the general direction of the torpedo. My weapons officer also turned tube 1 onto active sonar pinging, and it headed northeast to where we believed the last of the enemy escorts was patrolling. I also ordered tube number 2 reloaded with a harpoon missile. Hopefully once the escorts were gone, we could immediately launch on the container ships. But at this point, we detected 2 enemy torpedoes heading towards us from the northeast. The Krivak we had just destroyed got off a volley just before it was hit. I studied their course and bearing for a bit. They were on a diverging course, and it looked like they were going to miss us, and we should end up in between the 2 of them if we remained calm and made no sudden movements.
Con, torpedo room, tube 2 ready.
With the enemy torpedoes appearing to skim just under the surface of the sea, I ordered our boat down to 200 feet. This was more of an assurance that the enemy torpedoes wouldn't just miss us, but they'd pass over us at a fair old distance if they come anywhere in our direction. And it was at this moment that I saw intense concentration on the face of one of my torpedomen. He reported that the torpedo from tube number 1 was actually homing in on a target that our sonarman hadn't detected, and this target was throwing out noisemakers. And so we deduced from that this was the remaining enemy escort within the flotilla. And due to the fact that we didn't actually know where or what it was exactly, we had to trust in our torpedo to destroy it on its own, unguided by the hands of my torpedoman. I was still more concerned about the 2 torpedoes heading in our direction, and was ordering my helmsman to make corrections in course, and I turned the boat north. This bearing would turn us away from nearer of the 2 torpedoes. To the north, the apparent dogfight between our torpedo and the last remaining of the enemy escorts continued. The enemy was throwing out its noisemakers and turning as sharply as her rudder would allow. I could only imagine the terror and the scene upon the enemy ship there, as the ship rolled in the seas, turning as sharply as she could, with men and equipment being thrown to the deck, all knowing that at any moment our torpedo will strike. I do believe that it's due to the shallow depth here and the ambient noise that we were unable to actually detect exactly where and what our torpedo was chasing after. And I do also feel that it's due to the depths here and the ambient noise that we remained undetected by the active pinging enemy torpedoes that just passed us by. Eventually, our torpedo struck and the enemy crevasse sank. It was 3 out of 3, no more enemy escorts. We were free to head to the surface and shoot our harpoon missiles in the direction of the enemy transport ships carrying what we believed was the enemy landing force's heavy equipment. But the container ships within the enemy fleet here had scarpered. They were all running for the coast at maximum speed, but they were not about to outrun harpoon missiles. We let fly harpoon from tube 1, and it was at this point that we heard a dreadful sound overhead. Oh shit! Get the scripts down quickly! Enemy helicopter incoming! Tube 2 harpoon, shot and bearing 127. Get us down! Dive now! Dive, dive, dive! Both our harpoons scored direct hits on the enemy ships, and they both began to flounder. The enemy helicopter passed overhead without stopping, much to our surprise. We were sure that when we heard those rotors, that we were done for. But no. We carried on with our mission, and prepared to launch another harpoon missile at the remaining enemy ship that we couldn't actually see, but we knew it was out there and we knew its rough location. So we let fly with our missile and hoped that the harpoon missile at its seek ahead will do the work for us. The enemy helicopter returned and began to release sonar buoys in our area. It knew where we were. It had to know where we were. It saw our missiles launch. The sonar buoys dropped into the sea around us, and I was certain a torpedo must surely follow, or depth charges even. Either way, with this helicopter in such close proximity, our chance of survival was slim. It began dipping its sonar ray into the sea to our stern, and surely our torpedo must come spinning toward us at any moment. But it didn't. For some reason, it didn't. This helicopter and its crew were later captured by Norwegian forces after it was forced to land due to being low on fuel. And under questioning, the crew admitted the helicopter was being loaded ready for anti-submarine sorties at the point when our first torpedo hit their ship, the Kara. And it turns out that the armourers had only just been able to load a handful of sonar buoys when they were thrown to the deck by the force of our torpedo exploding underneath their ship, and they were immediately ordered to get airborne and assist in trying to hunt us down. But they were too late, and we heard the muffled explosion of our harpoon hitting the last of the enemy ships. Our efforts in sinking the enemy convoy carrying all the heavy equipment meant that the enemy landing force went without artillery and their armoured vehicles, and after 3 days of heavy fighting, the enemy commander ordered his troops to surrender. We had won a great victory here in Norway, a much needed victory following the Soviet successes in the opening stages of the war. We sent a burst transmission to Fleet HQ, and they sent us our orders. It turns out that some submarines had been detected in the area, and it was believed that the Soviets were preparing to launch Spetsnaz commandos ashore on the coast of Norway. This was likely part of the original invasion, but was now to be nothing more than a commando raid against NATO installations within Norway, particularly around the area of Bergen. With the downlink, we also received some vague reports regarding a devastating air and sea battle in the Sea of Marmara, a small stretch of sea between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Heavy losses on both sides had been reported.